presenting this very exciting opportunity from the department, the newly termed Department of Art and Architecture. I'm a professor within that department. And I have an official speech that Chloe wrote for me, so I'm just going to read from that too, as well, so I don't miss a thing here. The Visual Arts Department in Thacher Gallery at USF is pleased to present this discussion of the works of Corita Kent with Sasha Carrera, Amy Franceschini of Future Farmers, a fellow teacher with me and myself. Sasha Carrera is the director of the Corita Art Center in the Immaculate Heart Community in Los Angeles. Amy Franceschini and I are faculty in the graphic design program at USF, which will in the future be the design program. We're making some changes and making it much more interesting and interdisciplinary. So pay attention to that as well. We'll each talk, and then you'll have time to ask Sasha questions. Just Sasha. Not me. Please join us for a reception following the discussion. The exhibition downstairs is entitled Power Up and will be up through April 20th. The next exhibition, Revolution 9, the Thacher Student Showcase, will open May 5th, and I'd like to encourage you all to come back for that. It's a really exciting opportunity we have every year that extends through the summer for our students to show their best work from the year. So in closing, the gallery would like to thank John Hawk, the Donohue Rare Book Room, and the Gleeson Library staff for making this event possible. Thank you, John.
Thank you, John.
And we would also like to thank Sasha, Therese Agnew, Michael Burke, Megan McGowan, Chance Perez, Henry Smith, and Taylor Spitzer for their help on this exhibition.
Thanks. So I know that there are several of you here who are very familiar with Corita and her work, and a few people who are not. And so forgive me if this is redundant for those of you in the know, but I'm just going to do what I prepared. So Corita was born in 1918. Her name was Frances Kent. She was born in Fort Dodge, Iowa, moved to Los Angeles when she was about 4 years old, and coming up, she was one of 6 children, the 5th of 6. Joined the Order of the Immaculate Heart of Mary right out of high school, and was promptly sent to Canada, where she taught for several years before coming back to Los Angeles to teach art at Immaculate Heart College. And that was in about 1945, somewhere around there. She was famous for making these assignments that just really overloaded students. Do 100 drawings by, well, probably there are people here who know better than I. 100 drawings in a day or two, 200 questions on one particular topic. And she would have her students make finders that are like slides, like empty slides, and take them around looking at things so that they would frame things, they would see things in a different frame. She started directing the art department in 1964 and started a Great Man series where people like Buckminster Fuller and Charles and Ray Eames and John Cage all came and spoke. And in fact, Buckminster Fuller described his visit there as one of the most inspiring experiences of his life. Corita only made her art for about 2 weeks during the summer, between summer school and the regular school term. And she was an insomniac, and she would just turn these things out. She had to help with students and other faculty and other sisters. And she was prolific. She had a great big exhibition. And the other thing that she started that's something that people are really drawn to was Mary's Day. Until then, Mary's Day had sort of been a rather somber event of a line of students carrying a calla lily to put in front of the statue of the Virgin Mary. And after one of these events, Corita was sort of making fun of it, and the then president of the school said, well, do something better. So she got the entire school involved. They would have a theme like food or flowers, and everyone from every department of the entire college would have a hand in making a huge celebration. And that was one of the things that she was really, through her work and through her writing, there's a theme of celebration that comes up again and again. In 1968, Corita took a sabbatical and moved to actually, I'm getting ahead of myself. Her work during this time was mainly, she got a master's of art history at University of Southern California. And her thesis was on medieval sculpture. And she really was sort of struggling with strong forms, and medieval art was what was resonating with her. And so her very early work is very Byzantine, sort of neo-Gothic, and very, directly taken from the Bible and scripture and figurative work. But she was also interested in words, in the form of words, and the aesthetic property of words. And she talked about it being sort of like the traditional sampler, God bless our happy home. And you'll see as she was sort of struggling with the idea of figurative work and what are really strong forms, because she wasn't very happy with what was going on between the Middle Ages and abstract expressionism. She didn't really have much use for the things in between. So it was sort of these medieval forms, the lettering, and abstract expressionism. She talks about Motherwell and Gottlieb and Rothko as being her biggest inspirations during that time. And so she's got sort of this constant, and you can see the little small writing on the bottom. The envelopes are on all the fruit trees. But just really exploring these different things at the same time. And at the same time, with these looking exercises that I described earlier, finding that really close looking reveals the extraordinary in the ordinary. And she started kind of blurring the line between sacred and secular. And this is an example I like to give. This is a piece from 1961 called Magpie in the Sky. And this is a piece from the same year called The Holy. And you can see that Magpie and the Holy Spirit are basically the same image. And that continued. This is another sort of, you can see it's called High. You can see where High is in. That idea of finding spiritual meaning in everyday objects culminated in the work that's most widely celebrated now, the pop pieces. This is called Wonder Bread, and she's interested in the visual properties of the bread, the Wonder Bread wrapper, and the idea of the communion wafer, and the idea also just of bread in general. I'll get to that in a second. This one is actually at the DeYoung Museum. There's a lot of Corita in San Francisco, but a lot of people don't know about it. You will now. She used advertising slogans and signage from Market Basket and popular song lyrics. And the man you can lean on is from a Chevrolet dealership. And these pieces were really just as religious as her very earliest ones. In fact, I took a little, she wrote an essay called Art and Beauty in the Life of a Sister, and she reinterprets a Hunt's tomato ketchup ad as a religious sort of, she talks a lot about reinterpreting, taking the words that have been used in advertising and in popular culture and taking them back and giving them new meanings, and that the mythology and the fairy tales we are continuing to write those today, only they're being written in advertising. We just have to reinterpret them to mean what the Spirit wants them to mean. So this Hunt's tomato ketchup ad, the ad says, "Hang on, little tomato, stay on the vine, keep growing till you're fat and juicy," which Corita interprets to say, "Little child, which is Christ, eat up all the good things and people around you which add to your stature." The ad says, "Get picked while you're fresh as dew, bubble in Hunt's 7 spices until you're bursting with flavor, sparkle and shine in a bright new bottle until some smart new hamburger teams up with you. Then people will never forget you. You'll be ketchup with a big tomato taste." And our message from that is, give freshly in a particular job, all 7 sacraments, the whole life cycle, which gives us divine flavor bursting out of our human nature, new challenges that come with new times, marriage or friends, because we are beautiful and human and Christian, promise of future greatness. And in an interview, when someone asked her, well, do you think people are really getting the religious meaning from these pieces 20 years from now when they're looking at them? And she said, well, it doesn't matter. They're going to interpret them the way they interpret them. But the fact that they're usually grouped together, she felt that the juxtaposition is going to make up for the fact that people might not know about the Hunts tomato ketchup ad. The IHMs were also, or are also, a very socially progressive group of people. And so social justice plays a large role in her work. And this is again the Wonder Bread with the visual properties and the spiritual meaning, but also the quote by Camus, which is really about human dignity and social justice and equality. And this is another pervasive theme in her work. In the mid-60s, she met Dan Berrigan, and his anti-war fervor was contagious, and she caught it in a big way. She talked about how she really wasn't brave enough to do the kind of things that Bill and Dan were doing, like burning draft cards and being chased by the FBI, but she could say what she wanted to in her work. In 1968, she decided to leave the Immaculate Heart Community. She took a sabbatical. She went to Boston. She spent the summer on the Cape and opted not to go back. And she spent the following year in Boston. She spent a lot of time at St. Emma's Monastery. And you can see her work was really very, very overtly political. And this is some of the strongest and most, almost incendiary work that she did. These are from 1969. And then she came back to Boston, and in 1970 her work changed drastically. She was always influenced by her surroundings, and when she moved to Boston, it was the first time she'd ever lived alone. Before that, coming from a family of 6 children, living with all these other nuns, 100 at least at a time. So she was surrounded by space and solitude, and she became much more contemplative and reflective. And she was in a place where the seasons changed, and a lot of that comes up in her work too. The whole idea of winter and spring and rebirth. She talked about her work seeming simpler, but because it was the culmination of all that had gone before, it really wasn't. And in 1974, and again in 1977, she battled cancer. And this is from her Moment series, which is both about the changing of the seasons, but also her awakening from illness. And this whole series was made into a book that was published by Beacon Press with a foreword by Norman Cousins. This piece is Bird of the Rainbow. It's downstairs, and it started as a watercolor, which is one of the other things she started doing in Boston. She would drive around with a friend, and they would just paint outside on Cape Cod or in the countryside, and she made some of these watercolors into screens. So this is actually a silk screen made from an original watercolor. And the rainbow theme is a recurring one as well. The rainbow signified promise and hope to Corita, and probably most famous for the Boston gas tank, which it was Keyspan, now it's National Grid, which is her biggest copyrighted painting at 150 square feet, and the smallest one, which was the 1985 Love Stamp. The United States Postal Service wanted to have they did have the launch of the Love Stamp on the Love Boat, which wasn't really Corita's idea of love. She thought it would be better launched at the United Nations, and as you can see from this piece that's similar to the stamp, love is hard work. It's not Love Boat. She was also, by the end of her time, in 1982, she did an interview where she talks about her concern with the earth. She said, in my work, there's a growing awareness of our responsibility to protect the earth. There's a more direct contact with nature, a feeling of the fragility of the planet. And this is actually taken from a photograph she did of shells. She took a photograph of a shell and blew it up, and then screened that. And the last piece she did, or one of the last pieces she did, was a billboard project with the Physicians for Social Responsibility, which she called her most religious piece of work to date. She died in 1986 when the cancer recurred, and she gave her private collection of works to the Grunwald Center at the UCLA Hammer Museum, and all the rest of her work that wasn't owned by private collectors came to the Immaculate Heart Community, which by then had reformed as an independent ecumenical community, and so we have the largest collection of her work in the world. Thank you.
Can everybody see the images well enough? Should we turn the lights down, do you think, or leave it how it is? Is that fine? No complaints? No. Okay.
I'm Amy Franceschini. I'm going to just try to set up here a little bit. So I'm actually not going to talk about Corita's work so much. I'm going to talk about first of all, thank you for inviting me to do this, because it made me think of many things that I wanted to articulate, and I'm going to try to articulate today, but they might be a little shaky. But I wanted to talk about her work in her time as compared to the times we're living in now, as especially focused political art. And this is a quote that was mentioned already, but I'm not brave enough to not pay my income tax and risk going to jail, but I can say rather freely what I want to say with my art. And so today, right now, as we go through this quick slideshow, I want you to ask yourself a question of, is there something that you would like to do but you feel afraid to do in our current political economy? And I wanted to think of, after after my slideshow, this might make sense, but as an artist and a citizen who's politically engaged myself, I seem to think that art is a space that's one of the last frontiers for freedom of expression. And I just wanted to ask ourselves again, what are we willing to risk as artists and citizens today? Think about, as an artist and citizen, that we should always be exercising our rights, and before we exercise our rights, we must know what our rights are. For some of you, this might be something you don't know what it's connected to. A lot of you do know what this is. This is just the First Amendment of the Bill of Rights, which basically protects us as American citizens to let us say and write what we want. Does anybody know what this is? It's Arabic, and this was on a shirt of a person who tried to take a plane from JF Kennedy on JetBlue, a man named Raid Jarar, and it says, basically it says, "We will not be silent," and the shirt actually said, in both languages, "We will not be silent." And he was taken aside and questioned, and was told he could not get on the plane wearing that shirt unless he covered it up. Not an artist, but a citizen wearing a piece of art on a t-shirt. Does anybody know what this image is? This is an image outside of an artist's house in Buffalo, New York, named Steve Kurtz. He's a member of a collective called the Critical Arts Ensemble. He's also a professor of art at Buffalo University. His wife died on May 24th next to him in his bed. When he called the ambulance came and immediately saw that he had a home lab, like a biological lab, and got curious and called the FBI. The FBI came and took his wife's body, took him aside for questioning, and he wasn't allowed to see his wife for 10 days because they thought he was a biological terrorist. What he was doing was he was creating biological art, and it was a piece called Free Grain. Free Grain. It was questioning the use of GMOs in our human food supply. He had been given some biological matter by a professor at the school, and right now he and the professor are being taken to court and are looking at 20 years in prison on a kind of lower level of accusation. They aren't considered biological terrorists, but what happened was the professor sent this biological matter through the mail, so they're being accused of mail fraud and mistreatment of biologically hazardous material, which has been claimed to be not hazardous at all. They were included, this is just explains what this picture is. This is the federal investigators from the Joint Terrorism Task Force entering his house. His work, a petri dish of this biological matter, was actually shown in the Whitney Biennial last time, it's 2008, so 2006. So he's very celebrated as a political artist, but is looking to serve time for his art. You might know about Michael Moore. This book he wrote, Downsize This, was very critical of our current political regime. He went to do his book signing at Borders Books and was told that the corporation decided they could not sell his book and the book was banned. So this brings to question who's making our decisions about what rights we can, what freedoms we have. Is it us, people, voting citizens, and our represented officials, or is it corporations? In this case, a corporation had the right to shut this person's mouth. This is another book that was banned in schools and libraries, and Stupid White Man. And due to one librarian who, I just want to show this because we're in a library. I love libraries. One librarian, using the internet to align librarians all over the United States, convinced schools and libraries to actually have this in the library and schools. It was a huge email campaign. Another artist I wanted to show some younger people in the room that might know Banksy. He's a graffiti artist. He's done a lot of work all over the world, but I think this is one of his most profound works on the wall around Calpula on the West Bank. I'll just show them. And one of the last things I wanted to show was really inspired by the High work that you showed. There was that piece that said High that was typography revealing textures of land. And this is a work of Hans Hake, who was not censored, but massively, this piece was massively distributed throughout New York City as a commemoration to the September 11th attacks. And it was funded by a group called Creative Time, which gives a lot of money to artists for public artwork. And they're very interested in politically charged work. So this was a poster that Hans Hake made, he's a German artist, that was a white poster with a die cut of the Twin Towers. And he basically gave this poster away through many venues and asked people just to post them around the city on top of already sanctioned and unsanctioned graffiti posters and media as a way to kind of nuanced way to respond to the September 11th attacks. And how I kind of translate this is that so many of us experience this as a mediated experience, and this is sort of placing that filter on top of other media. Here's another picture of that piece. And I just wanted to finish with that we should really think about as artists and citizens that we should exercise our rights and demand our freedoms.
Thanks, Amy. I'm going to talk about one of Corita Kent's images. I am by no means an authority on her work. I do consider myself to be very much interested in researching the use of text and image, and it's something I do a lot of here. So I went to the gallery last weekend and looked at a lot of the images for a really nice morning, and chose this one as one I just wanted to kind of talk about in depth. Did a little bit of independent research on my own, but this is all very personal, so that none of this reflects anything Corita Kent might have actually thought or ever said. You know, the title of this image is Words of Prayer. There is no prayer represented here, not even words from a prayer. Corita Kent called many of her compositions word pictures, and she uses words here to represent a story about the process of making a prayer. The story itself appears in the block letters within the panel on the right side of the image. The text reads, "He repeated the letters of the alphabet over and over, beseeching the Almighty to arrange them into the appropriate words of the prayers." When I first viewed this image, I was intrigued by this tale of performance, repetition, and entreaty because of its resonance with me as an educator. I wanted to learn more about the story and its original cultural context, and found a more detailed version from a book by Richard Seidman that I would like to read to you. According to Seidman, the story comes from the 18th century Hasidic teachings of a Baal Shem Tov, who rejected traditional Judaic values by encouraging his followers to construct their own prayers. As Seidman tells it, a poor Jewish farmer was riding his horse into town to pray at the synagogue for Yom Kippur. But a heavy fog settled on the countryside, and he could not find his way. As darkness fell, he was lost in a forest, and would have to spend Yom Kippur night there by himself. This farmer didn't have a prayer book, and he didn't know the prayers by heart. Filled with anguish, he cried out, "Oh God, what can I do? How can I pray to you?" And then he remembered the alphabet he had learned from his childhood. He said, "I know. I will recite the letters of the alphabet, and you, Holy One, will know all the words. You can put the letters together to form the right prayers for Yom Kippur." All that night then, he repeated the letters over and over. Not only was this humble prayer pleasing to God, but its power was so great that many people, even those more learned, had their prayers accepted at Yom Kippur, only because of the sincerity and purity of the simple farmer's alphabet. That's the end of the quotation. The letters that the farmer recited were the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. Moving to the left side of Kent's image, we find a representation of our own alphabet. This alphabet, you can't see it closely here, but look at it downstairs. This alphabet, a complex arrangement of cursive lines and flourishes, is an instructional model featuring decorative arrows to indicate the lines of direction that a student would follow as when using a copybook. The alphabet isn't the kind of writing we would ever expect from a poor farmer. No one writes like this. In fact, no one could ever write like this. When you look closely, you see that many of these letters take form as single strokes that move simultaneously in opposite directions, an impossible feat to duplicate with one hand. Kent's alphabet, though impractical, identifies for me the differing cultural values that we attach to competence and to expertise, and accentuates the ways that expertise, especially in writing, functions throughout society as symbolic capital. What I see in Kent's division of this image are two dialogic forces that work across culture, forces that Michel de Certeau calls strategies and tactics. On the left, we see the ways that the repetition of an alphabet represents the strategy of bad education, of expectations that can never be perfectly met. On the right, we see repetition as a tactical struggle for literacy. Part of the beauty of the poor farmer's story lies in its expression of perseverance. The farmer never formed a literal prayer with any of his letters, not even a single word of prayer, and for all we know, never received acknowledgement that anyone was paying attention to his efforts. Kent's work identifies every kind of expression as a potential activity of endless repetition, seemingly fruitless and possibly futile, with no immediate or foreseeable gain. The good news is that when we don't remember the words in real life, we make up stories, making do with what we can and what we have. That even when we lack the resources for knowledge, that ignorance can have poetry, and there can be room for integrity in those limitations. Thank you. Time for questions.
Why aren't you standing too? But they might have questions for you.
They can ask me that.
So they can ask me. Yes.
So Corita created the typeface.
Oh, no, I don't know. This one? I don't know. Do you know?
I don't know.
I don't think so. I think it's one of, she does a lot of appropriation, and my guess was that she might have drawn this one, the one with the block letters, but my guess is that the impossible one is one that she appropriated.
Thank you.
Yes?
I want to know more about these 100 sketch assignments. Were you literal on that?
Oh yeah. Judy, do you want to talk about that?
I think there's some others who had to do them. Who had to do them? Does anybody in this room have to do them? Did anybody have to do them?
No, I lived with Grace and things.
Well, describe that, because I didn't live with anybody who did it.
Well, she would give them, say, a Coke bottle and say, okay, take this outside and look at it, and you're to come back tomorrow with 100 different drawings of it. And you had to just keep staring at it till you saw something different in it. And work at it and come in.
People talk about how the first 25 would just be horrible, that by the time you got to 50, there would be something different, and the ones who actually did the whole assignment usually came up with something extraordinary by the end.
Or she also thought that some people felt when they did one, that it was perfect. And if she forced them to do 5, 10, 50, 100, they themselves began to see an emerging, different art form, more creative.
Another related assignment, I had a roommate who was an art major under Corita. She would give them a portion of a magazine picture, perhaps from Life, that was maybe a very small strip or half of it, and they had to complete the drawing. And that had to be 100 different versions. Actually, they came out lovely. I still have a huge stack.
And people talk about how she would take what they had done and say, well, turn it over. What if it's upside down or sideways? So different ways of looking. I mean, I think people, well, you could probably talk to this more than I, but a lot of the people that have talked to me about working with Corita really felt like what she was teaching them was a way to approach life. Not just art, and not just looking at art, but everything. And that's really what influenced them for the rest of their lives.
I didn't realize we were gonna get actual students of Corita's here. Who, do you all have worked with her in the past? Did you guys raise your hand?
Friends.
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 Why did they get friends?
Associates.
Friends? Can I see a show of hands of people who know her? Oh, wow, great.
And another activity that she gave, actually all of us, a little square piece of matting that had a smaller hole in it. And we had to spend one day looking at life through this one little hole. And, it's a little viewfinder. That's a good way to lay it. And to see life in a whole new perspective. That was pretty
Is there a definitive list of the work? Did she ever keep going to people's life all of it?
We have catalogs that I think have everything, but I don't know for sure. And the Grunwald is supposed to have everything, and I sort of check my list against theirs. But like we have a sketch that she did as a teenager, and don't know where it came from or anything. We just have it. So there's a definitive list, but it might be missing some things.
What happened to the systematic learning?
I don't know. I've heard there's a film. I don't know if you're familiar with the film by Bayless Glasscock on teaching celebrations. Well, Bayless was a student of Corita's who made this fantastic documentaries of her teaching and of Mary's Day. And I was at his house several months ago, and he was talking about a visit he made to Magdalene Mary, where she was sort of, there were boxes. I guess she lived on Coke and whiskey or something, and chocolate maybe. And and that it, newspapers stacked everywhere, and so I have the feeling that she sort of retreated into a, yeah. You have a question?
Yes, was that a quote regarding, I don't have the courage to income tax, was that but in art I feel relatively free? Was that a
Yes.
quote from Corita?
Yes.
I'd like to know what, if any, what were the sources of any constraints she felt on the expressing of her art? Because she does qualify that. She says, I feel nearly free, or something.
Oh, there were repercussions for a lot of what she did.
What were the sources?
Cardinal McIntyre.
Cardinal McIntyre.
And there were other people within the community also who didn't feel that what she was doing was appropriate. And every Mary's Day, there were people saying this is sacrilegious, we shouldn't be doing this. But fortunately, her superiors, by and large, supported her. So, but yeah, definitely the male hierarchy in particular was very, very uncomfortable with a lot of what she did.
Anybody have stories on that one? That they want to share? even her, even the relationship with the Immaculate Heart Community and Corita specifically to Dan Berrigan